All right, good evening, everyone. I know a lot's going on this week, depending on what part of the country you're in. So I do want to just, before I start today, turn our thoughts over to what's going on in Texas. They are having a crisis right now, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. Also, I want to acknowledge the female Marine who opened up this week about her struggles that she's going through while she's on active duty. Her story went viral. Obviously, it went all the way to the Secretary of Defense, and because it went viral and it hit news outlets. So, obviously, she wants privacy at this time, which is understandable. I can completely relate because when I went through that experience, it was so hard and such a struggle that for like the first couple years, I didn't even want anyone to know. Like, I wanted to put everything past me and like just not even deal with it. So, just she's in our thoughts. And, if she decides that she wants to fight this and wants our support, we're going to be on board with that. Right. And I'm pretty sure everyone is in agreement on that. Um, as for what we're going to be talking about tonight, it's a heavy topic. And this is also probably the most important topic that we're ever going to cover. So what I want to talk about is authenticity and vulnerability after going through military sexual trauma. And the reason why I wanted to bring this conversation up is because generally when people have PTSD and they go through trauma, isolation becomes very common, right? And pushing people away. So relationships become a struggle, and bonding with people becomes a struggle. Attaching to someone else becomes a struggle, right? So like things become difficult because once you're personally violated and you feel betrayal, wanting to trust again is really hard. And going through the process of experiencing attachment means experiencing the good and the bad of it. And, you fear being hurt again. So, my personal struggle with that has been difficult. And it's something that I still very much struggle with. I'm much better than what I was after years in therapy and, really striving to work out my own personal struggles. But this is something that's very common within our community. And this is why I wanted to talk about this for a couple of different reasons. So when we grow up in American culture, we are taught to judge everything around us, right? Like things are good or bad or good or evil. And we constantly polarize things on a spectrum, right? Our politics is like this, the wealth gap in our economics is like this, even our military is like this. Everything that is the core fundamentals that hold up our society are really polarized, and that can cause harm. So because we're taught to come from a place of judgment, we tend to lack acceptance, right? And understanding and empathy, which are very critical to creating a healthy society. So it makes it harder for people who go through trauma to be able to really open up after trauma because of the fears of what people will say, what people will do. And I'll give you a couple of examples because I've had these fears and those fears have become reality. And I want to talk about some of the things that I've had to go through as a struggle that are good tidbits that I know can help you. When I first came out of the and I went through everything that I had gone through, I didn't know where to start or where to turn to. Like, I wanted to fight, but also I was in such a bad place that I was too weak to fight. So, like, I had these thoughts and these ambitions of like fighting back because of the injustices I was facing, but I also felt hopeless. Like, I wasn't in that position. I was like on drugs. I didn't have access to medical. I was going through a lot. And when I was in that position, I would think about it like this is fucked. Like this system is so messed up. And I was angry, right? And because along my way, like I saw the systemic issues and I saw the patterns emerging. So even though I didn't know a lot of others who had gone through what I went through, I still felt a really high degree of shame and humiliation because also growing up in the kind of culture that I've grown up in Latin culture, sexuality is also a huge taboo, like at all costs. So even when you're talking about these concepts of rape, generally the way that it works in Latin culture is that, like, if you're the woman and you get raped, it's your fault for not protecting yourself. So it's also hard to talk to your family and your support system when you fear being judged by the very people who should align with you and protect you, right? So it adds that extra layer of shame and also fear of just not being able to open up. So when I went through this, it was such a hard situation for me that I just didn't talk about it. Like, what my parents knew and understood was all there was, but like I wasn't volunteering information and I wasn't like telling them any more than we needed to know. And that was a mistake. Well, let me put it this way. It's unhealthy, but I also had and grew up with a very unhealthy family dynamic because of belief systems like this. So I did what I had to do at the time to survive. However, growing up like that and making those choices while it worked at the time in the long term was detrimental to my mental health because that further harmed my mental health because I would isolate. So what ended up happening to me was that when I went through that, instead of turning to people for like love and support, I would just isolate anytime something triggered me or I went through a negative experience in a relationship, I wouldn't vocalize my feelings or my concerns, right? So if I felt hurt or I felt upset, my natural inclination at that point was to shut down and to isolate. So like not only would I like just stop responding in a conversation or an argument, but like I would totally get to the point of like disappearing. And this was so common that all of my friends, like this was a good, I want to say like 6 years. I got the nickname Houdini because I would, anytime conflict emerged, I would straight disappear. And like I wouldn't hop back around. Like my friends would look for me. And then they'd be like, hey, what's going on? Like, are you okay? Whatever. And like I would just not want to talk about things. And like whenever they came back around in circles with me, if they wanted to talk about what's going on, I stayed disappeared. And the only time I would ever like come back around is if like they just kind of moved on from whatever happens, right? But I would never want to deal with conflict after that because I felt like when I went through sexual violence in the military, and you know, I went to adults that because I was 17, right? So I was a kid, I was a child. I went to adults that were responsible for my well-being, right? And are supposed to help me develop a career. And instead, I got punished, I got harmed, went through torture, hazing, on top of the sexual violence, retaliation. So like when all that gets combined and pieced together, it was at a point for me that I just felt like no adult was trustworthy. And also felt like the entire system of itself was all about greed and money, right? And I still have feelings like that. There are some good people, right? It's not all or none, right? It's a mixture. So what ended up happening was I got to a point of really just not like trusting anyone at all. Didn't matter. Like even if I built surface levels of trust with someone, it would never get very deep. And anytime I felt it getting deep, I would put like a shield on my heart. And I stayed really guarded because I was so fearful of telling someone something and them hurting me versus accepting my story. Right. And I felt a really high degree of shame that if I did come out and tell someone my pain and my struggle, not only would I be betrayed again and hurt, but I would also be shamed. Right. And it was like I had already gone through all this. So I felt that I didn't want to relive any of that. And it was just better to stay closed off. Now, that presents a couple issues because it's not healthy to do that, right? So over time, what ends up happening is because you're not healing, you're doing behaviors that are self-destructive. So like when these feelings would come up, I would, do drugs and do things that were harmful to my well-being as a way to escape my feelings, right? Because I didn't have access to doctors and I didn't have any resources to really be able to help myself get out of this situation. And I didn't have any support, right? Like I couldn't talk to my parents about this. I had no one to talk to about this. So it really became a circumstance for me of like, I have nowhere to turn to. So at that point, I was like, I'm just going to act like none of this ever happened. And I'm just going to move on. Like, I'm going to move on with my life. And I'm going to just get my life together and career for myself. And I'm going to move forward. And that was really where my mindset was at that time. And when I was going just through life, I would do really well. Like I would do really, really well in my career. I would do really well with certain aspects of my life. But when it came to interpersonal relationships, intimate relationships, family relationships, close friends, I was really suffering because I felt so terrified of getting close to anyone. And anytime someone required more from me, more intimacy, more connection, I would either like lie about something or I would disappear because I didn't want to have a closer connection. And you're talking about like, remember I was a kid, right? So if your brain doesn't develop until you're 25, I experienced this at 17 and 18 years old. So you're talking about this whole time before my adult brain even comes in, I'm already at a point that like I'm not responding well to people. And I don't want to connect. Like that's what it was. Like anytime somebody would want a deeper connection, I would get severe, severe anxiety. And it became to the point that like intimacy, emotional intimacy with anyone just wasn't something I could handle. I couldn't tolerate it like at all. So it was literally anytime that happened, I got rabbit feet and I was like, and I just severed things and moved on. And that presents issues because that's not the right. Like that's a highly avoidant attachment, right? And a highly avoidant behavior. So that's an insecure attach type, and that's not healthy for anyone involved. So not only was I hurting myself, but I was hurting everyone else around me for the trauma that I was going through. And because I was so young, I literally could not, my brain was damaged already. I'll give you a little bit of, so when you go through PTSD and your brain is still forming, it's different than when your adult brain, like when all your neurotransmitters are developed, right? So after 25, if you go through trauma and your brain's fully developed, you're likely to recover because your brain has everything it needs. When you're younger and you go through trauma and your brain is developing, there's differences in how the brain connects, how the wiring connects, or how it doesn't connect. So when that happens, in my case, my brain doesn't create, well, it creates the serotonin, but it doesn't release it. So it doesn't release it properly. It tends to store it, and then I don't have serotonin available for my body to use. And what that does is whenever your neurotransmitters, the receptor site, hold on to the serotonin, and you don't have it as a free chemical available in the body to use, your fight or flight response gets activated. Because when your brain's in that position, your brain is signaling to fight or to flight, one or the other. So your fight or flight response turns off when you have serotonin available in your brain. So basically, my brain got stuck in a fight or flight response permanently, right? So for the rest of my life. And that's kind of literally brain damage is what led to the severity and the severity type of PTSD that I have. So I say that to help you understand why this created certain issues for me with vulnerability and authenticity. So if I'm on medication, I don't have the capacity to be authentic and vulnerable, right? Like I have them to certain degrees. However, it's not sustainable for me to stay in a position of authenticity and vulnerability. And those are really pillars or cornerstones that develop trust, that create secure attachments. So without the ability to be vulnerable and the ability to be authentic, we can't have healthy relationships because we can't foster trust. It's like trust is a conglomerate emotion, right? Because trust is made up of stability, consistency, honesty, authenticity, and vulnerability. Like it takes all of those different emotions to create trust. And anytime you lose any one of those, trust begins to floor between two people. So what happened in my case is that for me to be vulnerable, and be authentic, and to show up in a relationship like that, it takes a lot from me, right? And because I can't tolerate it, and I go fight or flight mode, and I know that it's not rational, but I can't help it. It's just easier for me to get out the situation. And if I can't, then I'll start fighting. So that is the level of damage that gets done, and why people who have PTSD cannot form healthy relationships when it's severe, right? So the premise of why there's an obstacle and why there's a struggle. So after years of therapy and medication, both of those have aided me and helped me to learn how to be authentic and vulnerable, even in the face of adversity and dissent. And I guess I say that because what happens a lot of times is that when you're coming out and telling your story, or when you're opening up, like 100% of the time, you don't, on the person on the other side, you don't know whether they have the capacity for empathy. You don't know whether they have the capacity for understanding, and if they have the capacity to be accepting. And when we look at American society as a whole, everything is about judgment, not understanding, right? Like a great example would be our news reporting. When you look at all of the news reporters, each one of them takes a position and comes from a place of judgment. But then when you look at a documentary, for instance, it's a place of understanding, the way the journalism is told versus news reporting. So we're trained to be judgmental. And what that does is it makes it harder for us to connect on these deeper and authentic levels. Because when you're going through trauma and you're trying to overcome it and heal, and you're trying to bond with other people, being authentic in your story is how you do that. And the person on the other side, if they're judgmental and not accepting or understanding, they can't meet you with compassion. And what ends up happening is they come from a place of judgment. Well, why did you go in that room? Why did you walk down that street? Why were you wearing this? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And it's like you try to explain yourself, but then you feel like you're in an interrogation, right? And you're like, this is not what I expected. Versus talking to someone and that person's like, wow, that's a lot to go through. That's a lot to handle. That's a lot of pain that you've had to deal with and overcome. I respect you to see where you are, to see how you've overcome that, and to see where you're going. Do you see the difference in that level of communication between the two? So what's happening is when that happens, the vulnerability, and you have a positive response, it works to cater towards your healing. That relationship becomes a healing relationship. But there's a risk involved, is that you don't know how the person on the other side is going to respond. You know if they're going to respond with compassion or with judgment. So what happens is some of the time that you are vulnerable and telling your story, you're going to be met with judgment and dissent. And one of the things that I have had to learn that is really important in overcoming your trauma is that when you're vulnerable, you have to make a decision and stand in that decision. And because this is what's going to happen. Some of the time, you're going to be met with judgment and dissent. Some of the time, you're going to be met with compassion. So when you make the choice to be vulnerable and authentic, you have to stay firm in that choice, no matter what the outcome is, no matter who the receiver is. When you learn that information about who is who based on how they respond, that is where you make the decision whether or not you're going to have a deeper relationship with that person, or you might just cut them off at that point. Versus taking on the position of like living a life that's just not real to your story, right? So being authentic and vulnerable, it's difficult, it's challenging, and it takes courage to show your true self. And it also is anxiety producing to be honest about your story and what you've gone through, and not knowing how the receiver is going to respond, because sometimes you really think that you're going to open up to someone and they're going to meet you in this warm, safe space and it's going to be great. And like, there's times that like it's very depressing. Like, even for me, when I first started talking to my parents and like I first started telling them what was going on, because of the culture that I grew up in, I wasn't met with compassion. Like, and I didn't grow up with that either. Like, I didn't grow up in a house that was compassionate. So I always knew that when I did that, I would be backlash. Like, I knew that was going to happen. And when you go through that level of trauma and it's your parents, it is painful. It is very, very painful to go through that, because these people are your caretakers, right? But what I had to learn and also go through in my process of healing is that, like, I can't take, like, if I live out my life by the way that they're reacting, I'll never be vulnerable. And that means I'm never going to have healthy, authentic relationships. So I might not have the ideal relationships that I want with them, but I can foster these relationships with other people. And, as I've gone through developing friendships and relationships and, just cultivating my own life and taking charge again, what I noticed is that going through that process has really impacted me in a positive way, because now, even when I face judgment or dissent, I realize that it comes from that person. Like, if you're being authentic and true to who you are and to your storyline and to what hurts you and harms you and what brings you joy in your life, then there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, you're doing the best for yourself and you're giving the best to yourself. So you're doing everything that's right for you. And that doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with you. And a lot of times there's going to be people who don't agree with you for a number of different reasons, right? Like, there's 7 billion people on the planet. So it just comes down to, once you get to a certain point with people, you have the ability to realize who is worth your time and who is not worth your time. And that is a better process to take, but it does involve putting your heart on the line, and it does involve risk taking. It does involve putting yourself out there to get hurt. And it's okay, right? Like, there's this real quote, and it's like, I don't want to love in half measures. And I think about that because it's so true. It's like, if you guarded yourself from pain and never ever felt pain, could you really feel the bliss and euphoria of what it is to be in love without knowing the other side? Because everything is on a spectrum. So it's like, when we go through pain, we can learn from it and we can learn what works for us and what doesn't. And that doesn't have to prevent us from being loving people. And love is going to be harder to find and cultivate in all of our relationships. But loving yourself, truly loving yourself, is loving everything about you and what your storyline is. Like, none of us came to the planet and was like, you know what? I'm signing up to go through torture. I'm signing up for sexual violence. I'm signing up for domestic violence. I'm signing up for hazing. I'm signing up for a dysfunctional family. Like, no one does that. So it's like, we come to the planet and we're little kids and we're like hoping the best and have these big dreams and we're curious and, we all want more for ourselves. And when these obstacles come up, we take them on as our identity of being worthless. And that level of shame is what makes it harder to come forward, because we feel less than human and we feel less than other people. So when our self-esteem is really low, we do self-destructive behaviors because we don't feel valued. And when you're going through the process of learning how to love yourself and take care of yourself, that's being authentic and true to yourself. It's doing things that feel good to you, right? Doing things that where you feel that love in your heart, or, being able to open up and tell your story and be honest about it, no matter what it is. Like, no matter how dark it is, no matter how bad it is. Like every single one of us have done things in our lives that we regret, right? And if you've never done anything that you regret, then you've never risked anything. So if you've never taken a risk and failed, then you haven't learned anything. So it's like, would you rather be ignorant and not learn, or would you rather develop your consciousness and be able to develop, like that's why our souls are here. Our souls are here so we can learn and develop. So when we are hurt, the healing process is our ability to rise into consciousness, and that is what our souls are doing. That's how our souls evolve, because that's how we realize that, like, there's something greater than ourselves, that we're all connected, that, no matter what our backstories are, no matter what any of us have gone through, what brings us together is our stories, our experiences, and our feelings, right? Our emotions connect all of us, because, we might come from different cultures and different backgrounds, but the thing that we can relate to is feeling emotions. All of us have felt pain at some point. All of us have felt disappointment, embarrassment, harm, shame, humiliation, betrayal. Like these are things that we felt. We've experienced joy. We've experienced excitement. We've experienced feeling respected and seen. Like all of these different emotions that we have gone through as people, we can relate to that. So when we don't understand someone's backstory and we hear their story, we can then understand the emotion, and we then can relate and then understand their struggle. And that's where vulnerability and authenticity foster trust and help us to heal and to grow and to move past the struggles that we've endured, right? And oh, sorry, some comments are coming in. See what's going on here. Okay, so sorry about that. So anyway, what I was saying is that when we're going through these types of struggles, they could be very painful and isolating. And when we have to make these choices of how do we move forward, right? Like every single one of us has to make that choice to stay in the paradigm of suffering, moving over into struggling, and then into healing, right? Otherwise, you stay in your box. So if you stay in your box, you're inadvertently suffering, and you continue to suffer because you're choosing isolation over connection. And there are times that you might need time to yourself. There are times that you need some self-care, some alone time, but it's a difference between isolating and just kind of pushing people away completely, and disconnecting in communication. It's hard, right? And it's hard to deal with conflict and be vulnerable and authentic while conflict is on, because you're being exposed to potentially being hurt. And that's what makes relationships incredibly difficult for people who have PTSD. It becomes so difficult because it is stepping out of the box, right? It's like coming out of this box, and now it's like you don't feel protected, right? You feel exposed. And when you're moving into that arena, especially when you're not equipped for it, you don't have the emotional tools to defend yourself. And then on the other side, you don't have the brain chemicals to think healthy. It's like you're in high alert, right? You become hyper vigilant, and you deal with anxiety or social anxiety. And then at that point, you start almost like masking who you are in interactions, right? Very surface level. Like, tell me about your life. Oh, my family is from Puerto Rico. I'm Puerto Rican. Oh, okay. Like, what else? Oh, I was in the military. Oh, what'd you do? Oh, I was there for a couple years, but then I went into finance. Oh, okay. Well, how was finance? What was that like? Oh, it was great. I had a great career there, and then I went into politics. Oh, okay. Like very surface level, generic conversations that, like, as your talking points, right? But that never really becomes fulfilling, because you're more telling your life story from fact than you are from your personal experiences and how it's made you feel. Because we're multidimensional, right? Like there's different facets to us. It's, our opinions are one facet, our emotions are another facet, our beliefs, our morals, our values, all of those different pillars of personality make up who we are and what we like and what we don't like and what we fear and what we don't fear and level of risk we're willing to take versus risk we're not willing to take. So when you're putting all of that into perspective, it's a hard choice to choose to be vulnerable and authentic. And what I also want to say about that is authenticity is being true to yourself in the face of anything. It means that no matter how any other person in the world responds to you, that you're firm in your decision for yourself, that whatever choices you make are good and healthy for yourself, right? And it doesn't matter what everybody around says or feels. That's what it means to be authentic. That no matter what gets thrown at you and what's coming at you, good feedback, bad feedback, whatever it is, you being authentic and true to yourself at the end of the day is the healthiest choice you could ever make. And not everybody is going to align with that, right? And it's coming to terms of accepting that there are people who are not going to accept you. There are people who are going to judge you. That is going to happen. And it just comes to a point that like that person's idea of you is not you. You know what I mean? Like, you know who you are. You know what's in your heart. So when people are saying things about you or criticizing you or things that are unhealthy about you, you know who you are. So you're willing to stand firm in who you are, regardless of the world around you, and you stay trucking on that path. So, and I'll give you an example for my own personal journey, right? I've talked about a lot of different having PTSD. I've talked a lot of different about going through sexual violence, and I have spoken about hypersexuality and how that is the side of the fence that I lean to as coping with my trauma, right? Like that is a side effect of what I've gone through. And for me, like there's different ways that I cope with that, but I express it. I don't hide it, right? Like I don't hide my sexuality. I don't hide how I feel about my sexuality. I'm open about it. So people who don't feel that way or agree with that will attack me, right? They'll come after me, they'll attack me, they'll make up bullshit that like turns into legit conspiracy theories. Like shit gets off the wall crazy that people have said. And at the same time, it's like, okay, like you're making all this stuff because like you're making up a delusion about who I am, and then spreading that delusion to become a conspiracy theory because you don't like what I do. But at the end of the day, I'm being true to myself and I'm being authentic in how I feel, and I'm presenting myself to the world authentically. So I know that I'm doing the right thing. So why am I going to stop? Right? Because if I'm stopping, I'm catering to someone else and I'm doing something that is true to myself. And the minute you do that, you betray yourself. And if you take the position to betray yourself, then what do you stand for? Because if you're willing to betray yourself, how can you trust yourself? And if you can't trust yourself, you definitely can't trust anybody else. So it's like authenticity is what helps you stay stable in your identity. It helps you to know your core values and the root of who you are. It's like when your heart beats and you know what brings you joy and purpose and meaning in the world, it is because you are grounded in who you are. But without that, you don't know who you are. And then you begin making decisions that betray your moral compass. And this is what I have to say about that. You will have an easier road in life by betraying yourself, but you will never feel good about yourself. You will never love yourself if you betray yourself. And I'm telling you this from experience. I have taken a much harder road in life by standing firm in my values. Whether they're popular or not, my values and standing firm in my values have come with obstacles and consequences. And that's just part of life. But it's very telling in who you're dealing with, right? And where you need to move next in life. And when I'm in positions of where people are essentially putting me in a position to betray my authenticity, I'm the type of person I will always pick my authenticity, right? Because with everything that I've ever been through in my life, there's no way at this point right now in my life I'm ever losing that, because my authenticity is my everything. It is who I am. It is the truest form of my existence. And I would rather live a life that's authentic and vulnerable and get hurt and deal with consequence than ever let that go. Because letting that go means I'm essentially selling out my soul to please other people. And for me, and on the journey I'm on, my soul's not here to please others, right? My soul and my soul is about elevating my soul's consciousness to the highest possible levels I can while I'm here. And for me, I'm not going to ever sacrifice that for anyone. And all of us have that choice to make. And what I have to say about that is when you go hit these crossroads, because there's so every choice you make becomes a crossroad. But there are a number of crossroads that you will make in your life that are critical, and then there's ones that are not. So when you're looking at what's a critical decision, I ran for politics, and a really critical choice is they wanted me to support a Republican who supported the child separation policy. My family comes from Puerto Rico, right? We have a very mixed background, but like that relates to like generational trauma in my own community. I'm also from Latin America. I'm not going to agree with that stance. It does not align with my moral compass, does not align with anything that I personally have for me. So there's other people whose moral compass is on the opposite side of the fence. Like for them, they just don't give a shit. But I personally can never support that. So like when I was in politics and I chose to take a stance to support my own people that I come from and not give in to a rich white guy who was just pandering money to people, they used money against me and took me to court in politics, right? So that way they could try to knock me off the ballot and try to get me out of the race. And that's a consequence for standing my ground. But like what's authentic for me was to stay true to my culture, right? Like I'm not getting involved in politics to support a rich white man. Like I didn't come from that storyline. I'm a Puerto Rican woman, right? I'm a female. I'm a double minority. Like I'm not gonna sit here and pander to somebody who's always had privilege when I don't come from that. That would be inauthentic. However, what was on the table for me at that time, I was offered $50,000 that to have my race fully funded. They were going to give me 50 grand if I supported this. And they would continue supporting my races for re-election for 2 more elections forward. So basically, I would get $150,000. So that money could be used for any opponents coming against me, and I would have been elected to office already 3 times had I done that. So if I took a choice and I sacrificed my values, I would be in elected office right now. I didn't do that because it didn't align with me. So what ended up happening was I ended up dealing with consequences, got taken to court, and then I had to spend $8,000. So, you know, what I have to say about that is like, that's a decision I don't regret. Like, yeah, it cost me money, but like I stayed true to myself. I stayed authentic. And politics for me has very much been like that in every facet. Like, it's the one thing I fucking hate about politics. Is that like it's like that more times than not. Like deals are cut behind the scenes where it's basically people in power ask you to sacrifice your morals for money, and that's how you get ahead. And that's what people do. The problem is what I've seen a lot of people do is like, yeah, but the other side to that is like if I take it and I get in that position, I could screw them later. Or I'll do that and then I could get this done. And the thing is, none of those people ever get anything done. And whatever they do when they try, and they end up with an opponent, the funding gets pulled. It's just a big mess, right? So politics has a lot of these power plays in them that make it difficult to stay attached to your moral compass. And that can also add to what's called moral injury. So when you make choices like that that are inauthentic to you, and you go along with it and you don't stay firm in who you are and what's true to yourself, you can experience moral injury for the choice that you made. And for anyone who has PTSD, that can make your PTSD much more severe and can make your symptoms much more severe, because now you feel like you're betraying yourself. And it goes back to, if you can't trust other people and you betray yourself and your own morals and you can't trust yourself, like there's nobody left on the planet to trust. And it hinders your healing process, because when you can trust yourself, and even if things don't go right, but you know that you're being true to yourself and you can trust your decision making, what you know for sure is that there's one person on the planet that you can trust, and it's yourself and your decision making. That no matter what consequences you go through, no matter what you're doing, you're staying true to yourself. You're being authentic. And no matter what obstacle you face, you know that you're making the right choice for yourself. And when you do that, and that you're honoring yourself and you're respecting yourself, and that is where self-love comes from. That's where it will begin to emerge, because love is another conglomerate emotion, right? Love is not just a feeling of euphoria. Love in and of itself is respect. Love is honoring, right? Honor. Love is commitment and dedication. And love is the ability to forgive. All of those factors is what it takes to love. And how can you love yourself if you're not even trusting yourself and honoring yourself and respecting yourself? And the reason why I say that is because so many of us are willing to hide ourselves, pretend to be someone else because we fear judgment, not take on conflict, and just run away from situations. And we sacrifice what it is to really love. And how do we elevate to the highest form of consciousness, which is love itself, if we cannot even do that for ourselves? Because at the end of the day, no matter what any of us have ever gone through in our lives, no matter what experiences we've gone through, no matter how many betrayals we've gone through, no matter how many times we've been hurt, no matter what we've done, when we come out and we come out more compassionate than we were before, and more understanding and more loving, our souls are elevating to the highest forms of consciousness. And when we get to those points and we're healing, we can give that to other people. And when we're giving that to others, we're helping them elevate their consciousness. And we become a healing relationship for others. So it's like our journey towards healing ourselves helps us to heal other people and have healing relationships. And I go back to say that too about my own family, because something I've noticed myself was with my own journey with going through military sexual trauma and dealing with my parents' relationships and, you know, my siblings. Something that I've come to learn over time, and that I've also noticed, was the more that I became understanding and compassionate, the more everyone around me started to develop those characteristics. And the thing was, like, I didn't have a personal example of that. I didn't have someone in my life that was a role model for that, right? Like, it was literally like, I don't know what the fuck's going on in my life. I need some help. And then started going to therapy and learning how to be compassionate towards myself. And learning that how to be compassionate to myself also helps me to really stand firm in my authenticity. Like, it helped me that no matter what I went through, I was grounded and I knew that I was loving myself, and that like no one was going to take that away from me. And that even when I hit these really hard points of, do I sacrifice my authenticity or not? I was like, no, like I'm going to stay true to myself, and whatever I'm going to deal with, it'll be okay. Right. And I'm making the right choice even when this is hard. And it allowed me to give myself compassion. And when I started doing that, it became innate that when other people were going through these struggles, I could offer that compassion to them as well. Because what we have inside of us, we can give to others. What we don't have, we can't give, right? Well, what we're incapable of giving ourselves, we're incapable of giving others. And when we develop these emotional currencies, that's where our healing process comes in. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have PTSD. It doesn't mean you're not going to have anxiety or depression or you know, anything that you're going through. It doesn't mean it's going to go away. You're just going to be better at coping with it in a healthier way. And it is those levels of being healthier that help all of us to develop and move and grow forward. But the reason I wanted to have this conversation and talk about this is because in our community as a whole, like we all have very strong opinions, right? And I think we have very strong opinions for a lot of different reasons. But when we're looking at how do we heal and how do we move forward, each one of us has the ability to create a culture and a community that is rooted in the values of love, respect, trust. And for that to happen, before we can even get to that point, we have to be able to offer authenticity and vulnerability. And that means telling our stories authentically, telling our stories honestly. And even if people don't like them, even if, you know, they're hard to talk about, difficult conversations, and also fostering vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is not weakness. That is like the biggest lie that society ever tells you, so you can live your life in shame. And shame does not do anything productive for anyone. Like living in shame creates a lack of vulnerability, and it creates you're inauthentic, right? Because when you have shame and you don't want to say that you went through MST or sexual violence, then you're like, well, I went to this Ivy League school and I came from this wealthy family that never happened, because you're ashamed of where you came from. But it's where we came from that has helped us be where we are today and has helped us get to this point. So our journeys are all merging together and are bringing us together and allowing us to support each other, because we're already on parts of our journey that we want to be authentic and we want to be vulnerable. And because of that, that's the reason our organization even functions. And it's important that we keep that going. And in order to keep that going means that we have to live our life to that standard. And living our life to that standard means that no matter what comes at any one of us, we're willing to be firm and say we're going to be authentic and vulnerable at all costs. No one's taking that away from us, right? Like authenticity and vulnerability have to lie within our hearts. And like that has to be the forefront of what our souls hold on to. And when we live our life that way, is where we have growth, and that growth is what will lead to community-based healing. Meaning that when we all demonstrate this in our communities and our families to each other in our conversations, that is where we can come together and move forward. And that's even without policy changes, that's without other things happening. That's just us repairing the damage that has been done to our community. And that is very important for each one of us to do, because, you know, not all of us can do everything, right? Like it's just impossible for us to take on those tasks. But what we all can do is take responsibility for how our souls are evolving, because we live in our bodies, we live with our emotions, and we live with our soul. And we can make choices and dedicate our decision making, make a commitment to be authentic and vulnerable, right? So we can foster honest conversations, and we can also be willing to listen to hard stories, hard conversations that need to come to light. And, you know, our vulnerabilities and authenticity aspects of being authentic are different, and that's okay too. We don't have to judge each other for that. We can accept our differences and move forward. It becomes harmful when we we have a difference in opinion and we start judging people, right? Like when we're judging other people and we're essentially saying that they're bad because of what they've done or their differences or their thought process, that is where there's an issue, right? And there are some exceptions to that. Like when things turn into violence, that's a hard no. There's a zero tolerance for that, right? Because it's not safe for anyone. Violence is not safe or healthy for anyone. You know, tell me one time that an act of violence resolved something. And I'm not talking about acts of self-defense. That's different. I'm saying acts of violence, like where people incited harm on other people. It doesn't do anything. All it does is lead to entropy, and entropy leads to chaos. So when we're looking to heal and bring people together, we need to be vulnerable and authentic. And that means, the underbelly of all of us, the things that are not good, that are not pretty, the things that we hide, the things that make us feel shame and anxiety when we have to talk about it, those things are the very things that actually make us beautiful, because when we can see authenticity in someone else and we are willing to be authentic and vulnerable, we can foster good, healthy relationships. And as people who have PTSD, that is our life struggle, is, fostering and holding on to loving, meaningful relationships. And the way to get there is using authenticity and vulnerability, right? But it's being that. It's being that. And you'll know when you're not being authentic. You'll know when a question comes up or somebody asks you something and you're like sitting there and you're being inauthentic in your response, right? And here's another thing too. If somebody doesn't like you for you being who you are, fuck them. Like, because think about it, like that's who you are. And if somebody doesn't like you for who you are, that person doesn't deserve to be in your sphere, right? Like, they get them out of your orbit. Like that, not all of us are meant to connect, but you want to surround yourself with people who, when you show your authentic self, other people who see your authenticity and agree with what you like, who you are, your true self, you're attracting the right people. And when you attract the right people, you can power build from there, and you can heal from there, and you can grow from there. Otherwise, all you're doing is staying in stagnant relationships or putting you down. And all you're doing is staying in people or groups or organizations that are constantly squashing you. Like, you don't need that for your life. You want to focus on what's good and what's healthy for you to progress. And like I said, it's authenticity and vulnerability. I look at them like guideposts, or like red light, green light, right? It's like if I'm being authentic with you and I have a negative response for you, that's a red light going off. You and we're not going to connect, right? And now it becomes, if we're both on different sides and we're both being authentic and we're both respectful of each other, we can stay in that interaction, right? But now if it becomes like, oh, okay, like now you see me as an enemy because my authenticity bothers you, and now you're going to harm me, that person's a walking red flag, a walking red flag. So you know that you don't want to engage with that person or have any meaningful relationship with them. You need to cut them out. They've got to go. And let them go cause chaos in somebody else's life, like, because generally that's what's going to happen. But what you'll find on the other side is that when you develop healthy, meaningful relationships with people who honor and demonstrate compassion to your vulnerabilities and admire your authenticity, it's a healthier orbit. And that becomes a foundation where you can create healthy relationships. So I wanted to share this with you guys because I see how this is a constant struggle in our community, and I see how there's constant questions about relationships, the struggles with relationships, open up, how to have conversations, like how to identify whether someone's good or not. Like, this is just a reoccurring conversation, happens so often. So I wanted to turn tonight's community hall more into a conversation that would benefit us, each one of us, on an individual basis, right? And that would be good for our storylines, and something that was just going to be helpful and not political, because we need to balance it out, right? Like, there are certain thematic issues that pop up in our community, and relationship struggles are a big one. So I wanted to share my struggles with authenticity and vulnerability and the difference in what it's done for me. And I hope that some of what I spoke to today about and some of the tools that I've learned are some helpful guiding posts for you guys to be able to move forward in your healing journey as yourself. Hey, y'all, stepping away from that cat for a bit. Yes, all that. Thank you. I appreciate that this is resonating with you. Yeah. See, I'm happy you guys are really feeling the love tonight. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think. So here's the thing: whatever reigns supreme is normally the hardest to achieve. And that's the other part of that, right? Is like being authentic is extremely hard because people judge. So it's you never know what you're gonna get, but you have to be willing to put yourself out there and that whatever you get, you're gonna stand firm in who you are, and that's just who you have to be. But yes, it's the right decision. I can tell you that. Even when it goes to the point that it sucks, it's still the right decision. And I will tell you, I've had some crazy experiences where I'm like, was it worth it? And then like a year later, something would happen and I'm like, oh damn, that really was the right decision. So, there's gonna be times too that like you'll question yourself and you'll question if you made the right decision. And there'll be points of doubt, but like when time goes on, generally the world gives you little like nuggets and signs that will tell you later on that confirm that you did make the right choice. And you definitely won't regret it. A much needed lecture. Thank you for sharing. Very honest, full thought. Appreciate it so much. Thank you. And Nighthawk, I totally appreciate you saying that. And that I'm glad that everyone is feeling good about having this conversation. I didn't know how you guys would respond to it, but it seems like this was a really good conversation that everybody wanted to have. So I want to say thank you for participating. I'm looking to do a couple of these with different emotional currencies that are important for relationship development over the next couple weeks. So I will have some more stuff. So we'll probably do like a series of like 3 of these over the next 3 weeks to go over some other really important emotional currencies and why they are beneficial and how to identify the different obstacles and circumstances that you'll deal with while you're learning to navigate the sea of emotions. So I do want to say goodnight, right? We've been on for about an hour. So I want to call it a night for everyone. I want to say thank you for everyone who's on tonight. I'll see you guys next week. Feel free to DM us if you have any questions or email us and, we'll get back to you. If you have any ideas or there's a topic that you would like us to talk about, feel free to share that with us as well. And that's something that we can talk about on an upcoming Facebook Live. So have a night. Enjoy your evening. Spend time with your families and friends. And I'm glad that, you guys felt this is valuable. So have a good night.